So let's start with oldest. Rod, we're at the 40th anniversary of your race, of your win in 1983. Very dramatic.
Sorry, that was 1983.
Right. 1983. 40 years, 2:08:59. That was, if I'm correct, your second marathon. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. I was pretty inspired to run one, so I thought I better run my first one in New Zealand, where it doesn't really, we're down under and people won't hear about it. So I snuck into a race down there, and bingo, it sort of came together. I thought, right. And of course, we got Ron Tabb on, who was third that day.
Yeah. So, in that same race. Okay.
Happy anniversary, Ron.
Yeah, you too. Yeah. So are you going to be in New York next week? You are,
yes,
aren't you?
I'm here now. I'm in Connecticut, and I'm heading down tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, Meb's heading over there because he was possibly going to join us, but he's got some family obligations. So, but I guess he's getting in on Tuesday to New York.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
Rod, that day, take us through your preparation for the race and how confident were you going in that day?
Well, I think, once I'd run my first marathon in 1982, and then, of course, I had about 35 races that year all locked in and committed to. So I knew I wasn't going to run a marathon in 82, but I believe, 83 would be it. So I went through 82. Well, of course, I ran the world cross country in 82, and that sort of came together, my whole plan. And then as I prepared in 83, for the first time in my life, I reduced my schedule, and I thought, right, I've got to train for this. So I really did set aside about 35 weeks of preparation. So it was probably when you've got ADHD, you sort of like, and you've got to be restricted to so many events a year. Whoa, what am I going to do? But once I got into the training and prepared, and of course it was based on the validity principle, so it was the pyramid, and so I just knew that I had to get back and just do a real good foundation, and then start to work my well, Sir Edmund Hillary would say, my Mount Everest. And so and as I started to put through, and then I knew there was going to be certain races I wanted to run. I did run half marathons, a couple of half marathons, the Saucony Freedom Trail, and the Virginia 10 miler. So those were the races I knew were part of that pyramid. And so for the first time in my life, I really, had this goal and focused on it. And that was pretty cool. So I guess flying from Reading, Pennsylvania up to New York, I just sort of looked out the window and I said, wow, this is it. And, what you've done is done. It's money in the bank. That's it. You just got to figure out how to spend it now.
What type of weekly volume do you think you were doing at that time?
I think I was averaging pretty well 100-mile a week. I wasn't 120, 130. I just couldn't handle that because I still like to do my anaerobic work and not so much track work, but just in the forest, do my fartlek training. And so those were my and then of course I had my races, but I know that I had a 3K time trial, 2-mile time trial. And I spoke to my brother, who's my coach, and I said, I want to run a mile. And he said, why? And I said, I don't know. I just sort of feel, that's where my heart is. That's where I grew up. And so I wanted to run a mile. So I went down to the local Reading, PA track, and my mate was there. And I said, don't give me splits. I'm just going to go out and run. And I ran 3:58.7. I thought, well, this is it. I'm ready.
And this was in prep for the marathon.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was just one of those, it was like candy to a kid, It just, I just wanted, I shouldn't say candy to a kid because I'm trying to get kids to stop eating candy. But it was, that was just one thing that I wanted for myself rather than, or outside of the schedule and the training and everything else. And my brother said, yeah, I'll let you do something you want to do. And so that just triggered me to say, this is it. I've done it. There's nothing more to do. Just now, just enjoy the moment and go up to New York. And just go through the process and enjoy the energy of everybody. And I remember I didn't want to go out in the athletes VIP bus. I just caught the public bus, and I watched all these people eating donuts and drinking coffee and laughing, and that was kind of fun. I just thought nobody knew who I was. I just enjoyed the moment. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. And the weather conditions were a bit of crap that day. Do you think that were a factor in how the race played out?
Well, I mean, you've got to have this. You got to take the blinkers off, and so I was adjusted to any conditions. I was a little bit concerned when the road, because when it started off, how slippery the road might become because of all the oil and stuff before it rained hard, and my shoes weren't. I hadn't geared my shoes for wet weather. Not, so it was almost an intermediate shoe. I had a low profile shoe, a intermediate shoe, and a high pro. A wee bit like motor racing car tires, that's because Scott Dixon's my nephew. So I worked, and I just said, right. So I just knew when it got a little wet, I had to be careful what was going to happen. Yeah, but other than that, I was ready pretty well for anything.
Yeah. And you were with Saucony at the time. Did you run in a special shoe that was custom made for you, or was it a standard racing flat?
I actually made the shoe with the people down at Kutztown. I would drive down to Kutztown, and I worked with the pattern makers and the shoemaker. And of course they're all German shoemakers, so that was pretty cool. So I just made adjustments, and I'd run up the street and come back. I said, no, I want another millimeter off there, and so we just played around, just with what we had. We didn't have high research or technology. It was just put it on the grinder and grind it a little bit more down and put a bit of glue on, and it was quite cool.
Ron, you ran that day. How did the race unfold for you? Watching Jeff and Rod up ahead of you, or were you sort of watching, aware of what was going on ahead of you?
Well, for the first portion of the race, Rod had hung back with the kind of the second pack. Jeff and Gitamus Shahanga had taken off and on it back then what was an insane pace, and Rod was the smart one in the group because he just hung back there. And there was a group of John Graham, Rudy Chapa, Tony Sandoval, guys that were very credible. And it was a nice little pack back there. We were all working together. And then I'm thinking that somewhere around 18 miles, Rod, you broke loose there, kind of started attacking the lead group or the lead runners with Gilmus and with Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah. So I hung back where I knew it was a safe zone for me. I wasn't a 3:58 miler.
And that was Jeff's first marathon. Do you think he learned anything by going out that quick in his first marathon?
Well,
if he had hung back with us, it would have been very interesting to see how that would have worked, because both you and Jeff, I mean, you were newbies at the marathon distance. So, Gitamus would have been out there in no man's land by himself, and you guys probably would have reeled him in together. But it would have been interesting because, I mean, the strategy that you used running the tangents, where Jeff was, he was actually not running the tangents and running a little bit, more distance. So could have been a little bit different race had I think had come back with us.
And Benji, you only ran New York one time, is that correct? 1979.
Well, I ran it twice. I ran it in 79 and 82. In 79, I ran it pretty well. 82, I ran pretty poorly.
Tell us about your New York in 1979. You ran 2:13:49. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, it was a strange. I remember it differently than what I wrote about later. And, I wrote about it like 2 weeks later, and then my memory years later was different. But we didn't get splits until 5 miles, so we really didn't know how fast we were going. And there was a pack of us, and then I think there was like 3 or 4 Tanzanians out in front. that we weren't chasing them yet, but we could see them. And we get to 5 miles, and Kirk Pfeffer had shown up that night before. Nobody knew he was going to be in the race. I saw him on the bus, but nobody else recognized him, and he was really in good shape. And he leaned over to me and said, we hit the 5 miles in 23:30 roughly, which was ridiculous. It may have been the wrong place, but it's still ridiculous. And he looked over at me and said, we're going too fast, aren't we? And I said, yeah. He said, what are we going to do? What should we do? And I said, well, we're going to have to slow down, but we need to slow down slowly. And he took off. I never saw him again. And so then I kind of ran. I mean, there were people behind me, but I kind of ran chasing the Tanzanians. And I caught them all. And I didn't really know it, but right behind me was a pack of guys. I came off the bridge there at First Avenue, and there's a picture of me leading, and then a bunch of guys, I think like 6 guys right behind me. And Billy comes up on my shoulder, and with Billy, if you don't respond to his surges, he gets strength out of that. So he'd surge and I'd surge, and he'd surge and I'd surge. We were going back and forth. I think it was around 21 miles. He looks over at me and says, we're leading, aren't we? And I said, no. Who's up there? Pfeffer. And he just left me. Like I wasn't even running at that point. He just, boom, he's gone. And I dropped back, 2 or 3 people past me. And we used the course, I think the same one you ran, Rod. It went through the top of Central Park and stayed in Central Park until just near the end. And we came back in running across the dirt. And I started feeling better through the park and caught people. And in front of me was Ian Thompson and Steve Kenyon. And I swear they were walking, and I couldn't catch them.
Rod, you started a new trend in 1983. You were the first non-American to win the New York Marathon, and that held true again until Meb won in 2009. So that was a pretty big deal. What'd you do to celebrate that day after your win?
Well, of course, we just drank beer, of course. It was no, because the New Zealand consulate, they were very aware, and our consul general, our ambassador in Washington D.C., he was from my hometown, and he was just a long-time family friend, and he brought half of the staff down, and so it was very New Zealand orientated, because it was just a great community. And I had a great friend, Kevin Lynch, who had the Wilson's Bar on First Avenue. So, and I remember, people were just turning up there. So each time the barman would come over, and he says, you better hurry up, because you've just had another 6 bottles of champagne dedicated to your win. And I thought, well, gosh, we'll be here till 3 o'clock in the morning drinking this stuff. So it was cool, just a fabulous time. And then, of course, I was on Good Morning America, and so I virtually went from the bar to Good Morning America at 7 o'clock in the morning. I didn't go to bed that night.
Ron, how many times did you run New York altogether?
Oh, the first time I ran was in '78. That was when I first began marathoning. And I ended up running with Greta. I just went out too hard in the race, blew up. But the next year, the year of Benji, I think you were 5th at in '79. Yeah, so I kind of got a better grasp on it then, and was in the top. I was just behind Frank at 8 and 8, shorter. And so I didn't run. I'm not sure exactly how many times I have run New York. 83 was my best race, but
so for those of you who've run both New York and Boston, which course do you think is more difficult?
I think New York.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. New York. I mean, Boston beats you up, but if you run it right, it's a faster course.
Yeah.
New York, at least when we were running it, the roads were a mess. And so that
as far as potholes and things of that nature.
And there was crap on the road, and
the bridges, the grading on the bridges.
Yep, that was an issue.
Actually, in '83, I slipped and I thought I was going to almost pull my hamstring.
Yeah.
I hit one of those man covers that were made out of steel. I hit that and slipped really badly. I thought I was kind of worried that I was going to have a problem with my leg after I hit that.
Yeah. The same with me, Ron. I hit the white line, the white lines, and boy, oh boy, I nearly slipped over there.
Yeah, especially
but-
wet. White lines when they're wet,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
very good friction.
And now, from my point of view, you know, Boston was just not me. I was too tall, too heavy. And I ran a couple of times with Kevin Ryan and some of the sections, and I said, you know, up to Heartbreak Hill would be perfect, but down from then on, I could not. There's no way my legs, because I, you know, that impact on the way down. So I thought, hold on, look at all these guys that have run it, and women who have run it are all lightweight. They're all small, you know, shorter people, less weight. So I knew Boston was not going to be for me.
Bourdin, I think, probably was bigger than you.
Well, that's true, but yeah, that's
There's a knack to running downhill, and if you got the knack, Boston's good.
yeah. Well, yeah. Look at how well De Castella ran it. I mean,
Yep,
he was.
yep.
we
He's
called
not
him-
a small guy.
We called him
Yeah.
Pine Tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm 6'1". I think those of us who are long-legged have a bit of tendency to overstride on downhills, and that can really beat the hell out of a person.
It's
So,
better just to have a high cadence.
Hey, let's get these women involved in this
Yeah.
conversation here. Paula,
Liz, 1991. So your first marathon, really good year for you already. You'd already run 30:57, which at the time was number 2 10,000 meter time in history. You're world champion at 10,000 meters earlier that year, and your first marathon. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I hadn't planned on running the marathon. It was I just finished the Tokyo 10K, and I really just got a phone call from Fred Lebeau about, I think it was about 7 weeks before the marathon, and they said that both Rosa Mota and Lisa Ondaniki, who were sort of the two top marathon runners for women at that time, had been at a press conference regarding New York, and a reporter had said some Scottish girl had just won the 10,000 meters on the track. Do you ever think she would be any good at a marathon? And they both said no. So Fred phoned me and said, well, what do you think about that? And I was like, well, I don't necessarily agree with it. And he just said, do you want to come and prove them wrong? So I said, without really thinking, me just being the Scottish woman that I am, I said, yeah, I'll come. And it was a very just on a whim. I did 2 long runs. I did 2 19-mile runs within that 7-week period. But bearing in mind, I was a high miles runner. Even for my 10K run on the track, I was 105, 110 miles a week. So I really, you know, I although I didn't do lots of long runs, I did a lot of like really fast 12-milers and 15-milers, and you know, and obviously as a track runner, and you know, I think Paula could probably agree, as a track runner, when you're in that sort of shape, and win medals at world titles and Olympic titles, you know, you're super fit, and I think that it transfers quite well to the marathon because of the type of intensity that we do to get that intensity of 10K running. And you know, I had like pretty much just under 7 weeks training. There's a lot of negativity all the time coming into the marathon. I think everybody just thought, you know, that I'd drop out, and you know, my plan was just to sit on the shoulder, and when I felt good, I was going to go, which is what I'd done. I just ran really easy all the way around and got to Hyde Park about 4 miles from the start. Just put my foot down and away I went. And so for me, it was a really good experience because I'd never ran anything over, you know, 90 miles. I never ran anything over 50 miles prior to those 2 runs. And it just opened a whole new sort of world and experience to me that I hadn't really thought about because I was just so focused on my 10K running. But looking back in hindsight now, I wish I didn't take the direction that I did, because I think I just went into the marathon and left my 10K running behind, and I think that I had a lot more running on the track to do. But then because I had won New York, was the fastest debut, you know, everybody was wanting you to do their marathon, and I you know, and obviously with being a UK athlete and the first UK marathon runner for a long time to sort of win that caliber of racing, London Marathon, you know, offered me a contract that I really couldn't refuse. And so I signed the contract, and that kind of was the end of my track career, really, which I think, you know, looking at what I know now, I wish I'd just stayed another couple of years on the track, because I had unfinished business there, and you can never retract what you leave. So I think, you know, although it was a great experience for me, I really was a bit cocky. I hadn't really trained properly for it. And then I entered the world of marathon running, just, I would say, a shade too early.
Well, it was a good start. You went on to win Tokyo in 1992 and then London in 96. So a good first marathon experience. How many times did you end up running New York altogether total?
I only ever ran it once competitively. I then went and ran for, Greta had a charity one time, and I ran with the charity in 2013. And then I ran with a friend who was doing the major. So I went and ran, so 3 times New York, but twice as a sort of fun runner and once seriously.
Well, the year we ran was 2010.
Well, that was when I ran for the charity.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
That was when.
Yeah. So Liz and I had a bet. We were both running New York, and the loser had to pay the winner's bar tab. And we both ran like crap, just over 3 hours. But she did beat me, so I had to cover her bar tab that night. So a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. And that was, you were coaching Allie Dixon at the time, right?
At the time I met you, yeah.
Yeah. And so Allie was along, and I think she ran around 2:42 that day. And so
too great. Yeah, she just won Brighton the previous few months earlier, and she didn't really run too well that day. But went into marathon running as an older athlete as well. You know, she wasn't too happy with the performance that day.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to see her, you know, a few years later leading the World Championships marathon through 30th day. Yeah, after you know, a rather ominous start to marathoning, but that was really cool to see her a few years later doing that.
I think she actually worked when she did she do the World 50 world record? Was she with you, Paul, then when she did that? I think she was, wasn't she?
Yeah, well, I mean, she really just kind of helping her out with a bit of advice and stuff like that. And she just joined in a couple of camps. But yeah, she just went out and did that 50 miler, and she held it before Desi beat it.
Yeah.
Have any of you ever had someone mention the term to you, say speed trickles uphill? So obviously, like Paula, you've run 8:22 for 3K. And most all of you started, Rod, obviously 1,500-mile guys starting out. How much of a factor do you think that is to be a world-class marathoner, to have that sort of basic leg speed where you're quicker at the longer distances? Paula, we'll start with you.
I think it's really important. As Liz was saying, I always found that when I ran my best marathons was when I would have been in shape to run a personal best, pretty much from 3K, certainly through 5 and 10K. And if I knew that I was in that kind of track shape, then I knew I was ready if I'd got the marathon build up as well. And I think the two kind of really went hand in hand. I know it's one of the questions we'll lead into later on, but I think it's probably the biggest change that the shoes have brought in, is that now anybody who can run quick over the shorter distances can also run well over the marathon. Whereas when we were running it, there was also that you had to have that natural ability to handle the beaten up legs and to hold your body together and still use that speed when everything is hurting and falling apart. Now I think that doesn't happen so much. So that's why we're seeing super quick times, and people who have the aerobic and anaerobic talent maybe their bodies were a little bit more fragile. Now with the shoes, I think that's been the biggest change through the training and the racing.
Yeah. Liz, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that, you know, the marathon's a great event because you can come to it from both angles. You know, I've known a lot of people that aren't as fast over, say, 10K, especially in the women, and have went on and won Boston and, you know, ran exceptionally good times that aren't comparable to their 10K times. But I think personally for me, the type of runner I was, I think similar to Paula, you know, I needed that intensity and to get the turnover for the marathon to be as strong as what it was for me. And again, you know, when I was in good marathon shape, I was in good 5-10K shape. But that is primarily because I came from a track background. But you know, I do know ladies that have not had that background but still ran very, very good marathons and came into it from really, really high miles. So I think, you know, there's two ways to sort of approach it, and whether one way or not is best, I think it's down to the individual athlete as to their body type, their recovery type, and just basically the type of runner they are and for the training that they need to do to be the best that they could possibly be at the marathon distance. And I think that's the beauty of the marathon.
Benji and Ron, you guys might be more like outliers on this topic, where there are a lot of guys who probably had faster 5K and 10K PBs than you, but you were able to run better than them at the marathon distance. Benji, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was mostly a road racer. My track career was hampered by bad coaching. I ran sub 50 for 400, but I never broke 413 for the mile because I didn't have a coach that was, you know, had no knowledge of how to train somebody like me. And I lived in the Southeast where track meets were, you know, if I went to a track meet, I'd lap the field in the 5K. And so, you know, and it wasn't something that I could do for pleasure that much. It was, you know, so I go and lap the field, big deal. I go run a 10K road race or 15K or something like that. So I did a lot of road racing. And I think that was part of my strength building for my marathon. I mean, obviously I did have, you know, good fitness and good speed. And, you know, if I was in good marathon shape, I just like the other, like Paula and Liz had said, I could run very fast on the road. For 10K, I ran 28:36 on the road at Peachtree, which is not a fast course. I was chasing Rod and Craig that day. But, you know, it's just, you have to have a good running ability. I don't think there's any slowpokes that run fast in the marathon. Maybe we don't have fast PRs, but it's because we didn't train for those particular events.
Ron, what about you?
Well, for me, after college, I pretty much abandoned the track and went to the roads. But then in '83, I started working with Coach Dillinger, Alberto's Salazar's coach at the time. And so I was reintroduced to the track. And actually, that year, I was second at Boston, and 5 weeks later, I went to Australia. But the week before that, there was the Prefontaine meet, and I used that as the 10K as a tune-up for the race in Sydney, where I ran 2:10 there. But I asked Bill. I said, "Hey, Bill, so right now I know I'm in shape to run sub 4. So I'd never done that before." And so he asked me, because I'd made the world championship team, and he goes, "Well, what are you training for? Are you training for the mile or the marathon?" So pretty much abandoned my one shot at breaking 4 for the mile at Pre. Ended up running a 10 there and running fourth behind Salazar and Jose Gomez, and Pat Porter. But yeah, I think, yeah, you have to have that track speed to be pretty high. You know, if you're gonna run competitively in the marathon, you have to be able to, pardon me, you have to be able to compete successfully at on the track think the 5 and 10 obviously are important.
So 1983 was a crazy year for you. You were second at Boston, top American, 209.31. Then you ran in the inaugural World Championships in Helsinki in the marathon, top American there. And then you ran well at New York. Was that just a matter of just how fit you were? Everything was clicking?
Yeah, you just have those years where things, click well, and it was that was that year that everything just seemed to be. I had a new coach. I was doing my own workouts now. I've been for the 2 years prior to that. I was doing someone else's workouts. So, you know what I'm referring to. So, but then once I started doing my marathon training again, and I was able to see what my potential was. I have a question for Rod. So when you ran New York in '83, were you looking down the road, I'm assuming, at the Olympics for '84? Was that kind of why you were doing testing the waters in the marathon at that time?
Yeah, I wanted to run the 10K and the marathon at 84. So
Okay.
I was really, once the boycott of 80 came out, I let go of the 10,000 on the track. And then I realized that what I wanted to do is focus in the next years on 10K, half marathons, and just see what I could do on a marathon. And then, so I had I ticked all those boxes. And so, but then I went back to New Zealand a little later than I should have. I was on the Hollywood Trail, so to speak, and got back. And then, of course, I had a bit of a hiccup in my training. I lost about 3 to 4 weeks, and then suddenly that 5-6 weeks behind, and so I realized that there's no way I was going to be able to run the 10K and the marathon in 84. So then I said, right, I'll focus on the marathon for 84.
Yeah, because your career, was absolutely amazing. It's one of the most amazing careers of a runner.
That's right.
From 72, the Olympics, and then all the way through 84. To extend a career at a world-class level, I just have great admiration for what you accomplished and so much respect. So it's not so bad getting your ass kicked by you. I don't feel so bad.
Paula, 2004, your first New York. You're 30 years old. Tell us about your experiences with that first New York Marathon.
2004.
Well, that was a really special one for me, and I think that's why New York still has a very special place in my heart. It was my 3rd and a half marathon, if you like, because I'd run 2 Londons in Chicago, and then everything had fallen apart in Athens, and I hadn't even been able to finish. I'd had to kind of pick up all of those pieces, and essentially, after we just checked out that everything was okay, we just made the decision that myself and my husband would just go away to Flagstaff. And I just said, okay, I'm going to run when I feel like running. When I don't feel like running, I'm not. But for me, running is also my healing time, my therapy, if you like. So I was actually running quite a bit, and there were very few days where I said, you know what, I just want to stay in bed today, or I just want to go and eat ice cream. I don't want to go run. So I found myself getting into shape, and I think it was maybe 2-3 weeks only before New York, and I did a good long run, but I hadn't really been kind of concentrating. I hadn't by any means done the kind of normal typical marathon set of training, but I had done that all prior to Athens, so it was all in the bank. So I knew it was kind of there if I could get healthy. And I just came back from the run, and I just remember saying to Gary, I wonder if we could get into New York. And he just kind of looked at me. He was like, probably no chance, but I can always ring Mary. So we rang Mary Wittenberg, was head then, and Dave Monty was putting the fields together. So we ran them, and they, of course, said, yeah, you're welcome to come in. I also wanted to check with Dina, because Dina had bronze medal from Athens. It was kind of like it was her American homecoming, if you like, and I didn't really want to spoil that. So we kind of checked in that Dina was okay with that. She was absolutely brilliant. The only person, one person wasn't happy with was Lorna Kiplagat, and she made that clear. But they just said, no, if you want to come race, you come and race. And I guess that was all I thought about. I just kind of thought about it like it was just getting back into racing. I was healthy. I just wanted to see what I could do. And I never saw the wider picture and the perception in the media, and particularly in the UK, where I think they really just thought it was a massive car crash waiting to happen. I think they just thought I was going to fall apart and not be able to finish. Whereas I knew my body was healthy. I might not be 100% fit, but I was healthy enough to go in and race well. So it only dawned on me in the press conference a couple of days before, when I was getting all these questions. I thought, oh my God, these guys really don't think I can do it. And then one of my most vivid memories, so I'd eaten something bad the night before, and Gary had to go out and find Pepto-Bismol the morning of the race because I just had a bit of acid indigestion. And so I'm getting on the bus, and Ray Flynn was there because he's Dina's agent. And I can just remember him looking around, and he was like, why are you the only one that looks happy to be here? He said, everybody else looks like they're going off to prison or to face a firing squad or something. And he said, you're the only one that actually looks happy. And I said, well, probably because I think out of the Rio, there was nothing else that could go wrong for me that year. And there was only just getting back out and having fun with racing. So that's why I think it was really special to me. I went in with 0 race plans. My bottle wasn't on the table at 5 miles. And New York then was unusual anyway, in that we only got fluid stations at 5, 10, 15 miles instead of K. So when that one wasn't there, and I was the first one to the table, so I knew no one took it. It just, for some reason, had not got out there. But even that didn't really mess with my mind, because I was just enjoying the racing and just really happy to be out there running it. So yeah, I did have some acid reflux problems in the last couple of miles, but I managed to hang in through it. I think I did throw up, and it's the only time I've ever thrown up at finishing a race afterwards. But still, it was a big turning point for me to be able to kind of flip it around that year and finish at least on a good note for the year.
So the biggest factor was that you went in with putting no pressure, no expectations on yourself?
Yeah, which I think probably for all of us, when you're in really good shape and you know all the training's gone well, that's probably conversely the time when there's actually the least negative pressure on you. There's all of that positive, I want to show the work that I've put in and the shape that I'm in, and I want to run well. But the one that's hard to deal with is the negative pressure, when there's a lot of expectation from yourself and from the outside, and those doubts are there because you know you're not 100%. That's the hardest pressure to handle. And that's why I say, going into New York, I knew I hadn't put in a perfect bank of training, but I did know that I was 100% healthy, and I was just going to be able to race it and see what happened.
And you went on to run a total of what, 4 more times at New York? Is that correct?
Yeah. So I ran in 2007 after I'd had Isla, and then in 2008, again after the Olympics didn't quite work out, I went back to New York, and then 2009 was the last time I ran it with an injury. I probably shouldn't have started, but it was New York, and I guess I thought some magic might happen and my leg might be okay.
So what we'll start with you, Liz. What's your favorite thing, your favorite memory about the New York Marathon and your experiences there?
I don't think I've got any. The thing that got me about New York was like the vastness of it, because I'd come from a track background, and I hadn't done a lot of road racing going into something like this prior to it. And to actually, have, like, in America, it's definitely because, like, they shout your name whether they know you or not, and you're kind of running along going, how do they know my name? And for me, it was like a bit of a surreal moment of how it was supported and how big it was, because I didn't really give it the credit that, I wasn't in marathon mode. I hadn't watched the marathons, I hadn't been involved in the marathons, I hadn't been involved in the run up to the marathon. So, I'd never been at press conferences and things like that for the marathon. And I was just surprised at just what a buzz it was, even from the start, to get down to the start and everybody drinking their coffee and, eating bagels, and I'm like, what is this? Like, I've just never seen that amount of people all on a start line. And for me, it was just excitement and a buzz of the whole entire experience. And it's not until you actually go to a race of that magnitude that you actually see like what a great event it is for not just the elite athletes, but really for the social runners and the charity runners and that, because it's just all one mass of people all going away to run 26 miles, the fastest that they can do it, or get around the best way they can do it. And for me, that's kind of what I remember. It was just how relaxed everybody was and friendly, and like like I even remember like going to get a coffee and a guy's buying me a coffee, like getting me a coffee at the start of the race, and I think, God, everybody's just so happy to be here. It was like amazing. So I think it was just with it being my first one, it was just really an eye-opening experience to what road racing and marathon running scene was all about.
I think New York, it's really cool how the whole city just comes alive for the event, and then the crowd support on the course is amazing. I mean, one minute you're in Chinatown and then you're in Little Italy, but the crowds on the course the whole way are just don't compare. I mean, I've done Boston 3 times and New York twice, and several other marathons. I've done Chicago, and I think the crowd support at New York is just unparalleled to anything else I've ever done. It's my favorite thing. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I even did Boston. Sorry, I even did Boston just with a friend there, and there's crowds there, but it's like it's sparse. It's not there from start to finish. You're kind of like you go through some sort of no man's land where there's nobody there. Whereas I think with New York, you just got like people everywhere you were going, and just so enthusiastic. And I just, it made the whole experience just really, really enjoyable for me. I can't remember one bad patch of the run because I was just having fun out there. It was great.
Rod, what's your favorite part of the New York Marathon?
The finish line. It's almost like every step. I mean, it's like, yeah, you live in the moment, you live in every step, and you're not drawn into looking left and right, but you're taking it all in, and the energy that is there, you try and tap into that energy and try and bring on some of that energy into yourself. As you go through, your first 5 is okay, the next 5 is, oh, I'm not sure about this, and the next, and so it's just an incredible mix. And I 15 years later, I ran with my daughter, and that was a totally different experience because now we're running together as father and daughter, and that was just another incredible wave of energy and enthusiasm and spirit. So I think that was something that New York was very special. But I sensed that when Fred took me around the course in about August, September of '83. I went up in August, and he drove me around about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I saw the course in the front window, and I made sure I looked down every turn, to look out the back to just assess the course. And then, of course, with millions of people, it's just wow, just a fantastic, incredible experience.
Benji, how many marathons have you run total in your lifetime now?
139.
139.
Wow. Yeah.
And
I walked one of them, but.
And what stands out of those 139 marathons? What stood out to you about the New York Marathon?
Well, it was the, I'd run Boston. I'd run several other marathons at that point, but and I had run well at Nike about a month earlier and ran through 13:47, but I was competitive with people that I didn't know at the time I could be competitive with. So that was new to me. And then the crowds you guys are talking about didn't really materialize that early in the race. We didn't really see that much of a crowd until we got off of the last big bridge, and around 15 miles, then suddenly there is a crowd. And that was exciting. That's part of the reason I surged with Billy and Billy surged with me is, we had all this excitement from the crowd, and you get a little bit of adrenaline, you do some surging that you might have waited a little bit longer to do. And that was nice. And then you know, I'd never been interviewed for television before, and I finished, and there were these reporters sticking mics in my face, and that was kind of cool. And then we went into Tavern on the Green. That's where we kind of recovered in, and that was interesting. I had no idea what Tavern on the Green was, but later on I found out that was sort of a special thing to be able to do. And it was a big deal. And I was still, even though I was in 27, I was I was 28. I was still somewhat of a new marathoner. I didn't really get going until my mid-20s, and it was sort of, I can run with these guys.
Yeah, it seems like that's the age where people really tend to excel at the marathon. Liz, you were 27 when you ran your first marathon. Ron, you ran your PR, you were 29 years old. That late 20s is that kind of the point where everybody really seems to excel at the marathon.
Unless they're Kenyans.
What was that?
Unless they're Kenyans.
Well, right. Ron, how many marathons have you run total in your life?
I've never counted. I don't know.
We'll just say a hell of a lot. And what's your favorite experience from the New York Marathon?
Well, your first time going to New York, you've got the helicopters flying above you. You've got the media. I know 83 was pretty cool. I remember being on the same bus with Rod and Dick Quacks, and I'm going, damn, there's a former world record holder in the 5,000 with Dick there, and then there's Rod, and I'm going, gee, I knew his career because he'd done how many Olympic teams and championship events that so you're enamored by the just rubbing elbows with the people that you're seeing there. Then you get to the starting line, you're going, holy crap, how did I get here? And then the cannon goes off, and and then all of a sudden, you've got thousands of people, and you're in front of them. You take off and head up the bridge and start separating yourself from the pack, and so just from that standpoint, you're getting goosebumps. It's exciting, and just being a part of it. I think just experiencing that, being a part of it is unique. So when I'm running, I remember because ABC Wide World of Sports had come out to Eugene and done an up close and special just before New York with me, and and that's, you just go, everything leading up to that event and leading up to that experience, and that people are watching you back home, and you're going, you can't screw up. You have to run a good race. So I think there's a little pressure on you from that standpoint, because I know Paula and Liz and Rod and Benji, you guys, you've got people in your hometown cheering for you, and they're watching they're watching it at home, and they're saying, they're rooting for you, they're cheering. You don't want to let them down. So all those thoughts go through your mind, but then now you're into the race, and now it's just, you focus. You want to just be, block everything out and just focus on the race at hand.
So you mentioned that Rod and some of the others were folks whose careers that you followed and you respected a lot. Some of the rest of you probably had other folks that you looked up to early in your career. Liz, who, when you were young and starting out as a runner, who were the folks that you sort of like looked up to? And
to be honest, like as a child, I came from a pretty bad background, so like we didn't have television or anything like that. So athletics wasn't like, I didn't get into athletics because of who I saw or what I watched. I got into athletics just solely through a PE teacher at school. So you can run the way you go and you run. So it wasn't really until I was about, I got my first GB vest when I was 19, and it was GB versus Russia. And there was the big Seb Coe and Steve Ovett thing going on. And from me being working class, I was a big Steve Ovett fan. So I would say from sort of 18 to 19, you know, I was a massive fan of Steve Ovett's. And I met him in person when I was 18. I was going out, I was in a hotel for the race, and I was going out for my morning run, and he came down in the lift, and he said to me, "Oh, Liz, are you running the 3,000 tonight?" And I went out the lift about 6 feet tall because I couldn't believe he knew my name or that he knew what distance I was running. So he made a big impact on me. But after a couple of years of doing that, and I went to university and whatever, you know, I started really following Greta Weitz. And then I was lucky enough to actually meet Greta Weitz in Florida through a mutual friend who was cheating Greta, and he was cheating me. And for about 6 months, he kept saying, "You two need to meet because you're so similar. You need to meet." And we kept refusing because we were both kind of, I don't want to see her and she didn't want to see me. So he arranged for her to have her massage. And as she was coming out, I was going in. So we had to meet. And then from that day forth, we became very, very good friends. And then she became my mentor, and then she became my coach, which was quite surreal. But so from sort of 20, when I started really realising what endurance running was, I would say Greta was probably the person that I used to be in awe of. But then in saying that, you know, everybody evolves. And it sounds really weird because I'm older than Paula, but when Paula ran her 2:15, that absolutely astounded me. And I thought I'd just seen the best performance of a woman ever. And that for me was very, very, even though I was past my career and whatever, but to see someone run that caliber of running back when she did it was absolutely amazing to me as a woman. And so it really, you know, 3 people, but for different reasons.
Hey, Liz, how many miles a week did you typically put in after you moved on from the track to the marathon?
Do you know, what worked well for me was about 110 miles. I felt when I ran 110 miles, I was able to get the quality as well as the quantity. But you know, I was self-coached, and when I was self-coached, I used to get a lot of people trying to tell me what to do. And it's kind of touching on when Paula said earlier, when you have a bad run, and especially being in the UK, everybody becomes an expert, and they're telling this is people that are past runners and whatever. So, you know, I then went into a little spell where people were telling me I needed to do more miles. So I then went and started running 120 miles a week. And for two to a 3 year period, I had the worst period of running in my career through listening to misadvice that didn't suit me. So after I ran my slowest ever London Marathon, I actually ran 2:32 off 120 miles a week. I was actually overweight, which is like really weird to say, but I just wasn't efficient anymore because I was doing all this long, slow running. So that was the kick up the butt that I needed. And I went back to what I needed to do for me to be the best. So for me, a balance for me was about 110 miles a week, 105 to 110. And a recovery of like say 95 miles a week. I used to work on a cycle where we actually, you know, did a progression, you know, 95, 100, 105, 110 back to 95. And that worked well for me.
Paula, how about you?
Well, I worked on a slightly different schedule, I guess, because I worked off an 8-day schedule. So when people ask me like what was my weekly mileage, then I've got to add up the 7 days, and then the 8th day kind of falls away. So it would be 125 to 130. I went as high as 150, but again, these are estimates because I didn't clock it all. It was just based on roughly what pace I thought I was running. And I also, because I was diagnosed with asthma when I was a kid, and also because when I was a kid, I used to go down to the track, we used to jog like 10 minutes warm up, before we knew what workout we were doing. So that became a part of my training. So every run, even a steady run. So even if I was doing 5 or 6 miles, I did a 10-minute jog before, and then I'd do a cool down afterwards. So that kind of bumped up the mileage with slow stuff when I added it up. So that for that 7-day period, I would be up that high, averaging, I guess, in the 130s, low 130s. But if you added in the rest day for the next week, then that would be right down. So it was more for me. I only started adding it up because journalists started asking me what was my mileage. That was the only reason I started adding it up in the first place. So what the main structure of the week was more just making sure that I got in the track workout, the road rep workout, the tempo run, and the long run. And so I had 4 hard days in the week, and then 3 recovery days in there. And then I'd take a complete day off where I would just recharge everything.
Yeah. So Benji and Rod, you guys were 90 to 105 mostly. I know these guys because, I talked to them before. So Benji, yours was around 100, less a little bit under 100.
Well, I was probably more 85 to 95. It took me a while to figure out to do that. I was like Paula in that I had easy days, but I took 4 easy days a week. And because I did have a job for the early part of it, I had to juggle and try to stay with a 7-day cycle. I would get, my easy days were really easy. It would be just whatever I felt like running that day for 6 miles. That was it. My harder days would, I'd have a speed session on Tuesdays. And for me, speed was somewhere between 800 meters and a kilometer. And I'd do maybe as much as 8K in a, 15-mile run. And then that afternoon, I'd do 6 to 10. Then the other Thursdays would be my long day. I would run 2 hours and 20 minutes to 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I'd be somewhere between 21 and 24 miles. And then I'd come back that afternoon and do 10 to sometimes 15.
Benji, as a younger guy, who were some of the people that you looked up to for inspiration?
Well, my first inspiration was Jim Ryan. When I was in junior high, he was doing his high school mile and breaking 4, and it was sort of like, oh my God, I got to be a miler. That's and actually even before that, back when I was in elementary school, they had a thing in Weekly Reader about Peter Snell setting the world record in the mile. And I didn't know how far a mile was, but it turned out it was about the distance from the school to my home. So I jogged back home. And that was my first touch of, what is it to be a runner? And then, in junior high, I became, a miler, not very good, but did run the mile, ran 5 flat as a freshman. And then I was going to quit because I also was in the band and I was, a decent French horn player. And I thought, well, I'm decent at French horn. I'm only so-so in the mile. And I discovered, we moved from California to South Georgia, and I discovered the school record was 5:04. And sort of, I could break the school record. I could get a letter jacket. And I pushed the school record holder to 4:54, and I ran like 4:56 my sophomore year. By the end of high school, I was down to 4:36, which is decent, and pretty good for Georgia, but I wasn't going to scare anybody. But then I continued through college, still thinking I could be a miler, even though I really wasn't getting the coaching properly. And then 72 shorter came my next hero by winning the gold. And then Billy came along and ran really well. And I saw them as somebody that I could emulate. I didn't think I'd ever be as good as them, but I could do what they were doing. And those were the heroes I had.
And Rod, obviously a long history of great runners in New Zealand. You mentioned Peter Snell already. Who are some of the other guys that you looked up to growing up?
Well, I think our first, well, of course, my real hero was Sir Edmund Hillary. I mean, because when I was 10 years old, he came to our school, and he told us kids that Mount Everest wasn't high enough for your goals, your dreams, and your aspirations. And that was when I was 10 years old. But then when running became my thing, I got knocked down at cricket and I got hammered at rugby, and running without stopping was kind of, I like that. That was something that I thought, oh, the teacher would clap their hands and you'd just run, and then you'd run across the finish line. I like that. You know, you didn't, there was no stopping. But then certainly when we started to learn more about, you know, Jack Lovelock in 1936, gold medal and world record. And then, of course, Snell, Hellberg, Bailey, and they all came to my hometown and ran these relays. And that was just really cool. I remember a friend and I stood outside their hotel for about an hour and a half to get their autographs. And when they came down, he said, "Why didn't you come in and get the reception to call us?" Oh no. You know, so those are the moments that really defined and laid the foundation to just wanting to being inspired by them. And of course, after the Olympics in 1972, the media asked me who were my heroes and as inspiration. And I said, well, my hero is my brother, because he's almost 4 years older than me. And of course, whatever John could do, I believed I could do. And he inspired me to do it. But my inspiration really was Sir Edmund Hillary. And they said, have you told Sir Edmund? I said, well, you don't call the Queen and you don't call Sir Edmund. I mean, but his name and address was in the phone book. So next time I was in Auckland, I went around and knocked on the door. So, and I met my hero, you know, my inspiration. So all of those things all laid in, and they were just the basis of what I did. And of course, you know, Peter Snell was on the board with the Lydiard Foundation, and Arthur, of course, and Lorraine Muller, who to this day, I met Lorraine when she was 17, and we still talk every week. So it's just amazing journey, great journey of great people.
Let's move on and talk about, what do you guys think the main differences in training these days compared to what you were doing when you ran your personal best? Ron, let's go ahead and start with you. What do you think on that?
Well, during college, I knew that, you know, I recognized that the longer the distance, the more competitive I became. So after college, I decided to, I had 3 years before the Olympic trials in '80, and I said, you know, that was my main focus. I just started building the mileage up, and, you know, my mileage, you know, I was doing anywhere, you know, 140, 150 miles a week in Houston, Texas. And my training is probably more unorthodox than any of your guys' training, because I didn't have I would like Liz, I was self-coached. I coached myself for 6 years. But one of the differences between most of you is I spent almost zero time on the track. I pretty much abandoned the track after college and focused on building a base and a foundation and trying to get a qualifying time for the trials. So I was often, you know, I would say, okay, this is my goal for the week, this is my goal for the month, and this is what I want to get accomplished in this you know, this next few in this training cycle. So you know, I started off very meager performances, 240 something for my first marathon, even though it was 90 degrees, but it's still, you know, slow. But a few weeks, I raced a lot, like Benji and I, we came from the old school of, you know, where we probably did 25 to 30 races at least a year. You know, but
what do you think? What do you think people are doing now differently these days compared to, like, I know now, well, altitude is a huge factor. Like at that
altitude
time,
training, yeah, we weren't
altitude at all, right?
Yeah, we weren't altitude. I mean, Frank Shorter, he was training in Gainesville, you know, and there was Jack Batchelor was down there. There were a number of Olympians training in Gainesville at the time. There was, you know, really, you didn't hear a lot about altitude training back in the 70s and early 80s. Well, early 80s, you started seeing more people go to altitude training. But for me, I was sea level my entire career, because I liked running flat or on the fast on the flats and putting high mileage in. No track workouts, just a lot of fartlek training and high mileage. So today, you don't see Americans. I don't I don't see anyone training the way I did. I don't I think there's lots of better training techniques today than there were back when we were, because we were really, a lot of us, we were still learning how to train properly. Paula, you're 140, 150. I don't see.
They were one-offs.
Yeah, what's that?
They were
Yeah.
one-offs. They weren't like the average.
Yeah, we just don't see that.
Yeah.
I just don't think we see that. But also the equipment, that's what you have to take in consideration. The shoes that we trained in back in the day are far inferior to the shoes that we have today, because the shoes we have today, you can recover much, much faster than the shoes we had back in the
We'll get into the shoe chat here. We'll get into the shoe chat here in a bit.
But that's a big difference.
But that is, yeah, I think that is the biggest difference in the change now. I mean, none of us would have thought about doing a long run in your racing shoes. I used to use my racing shoes on the track or for some road reps, and that was it.
I ran everything in my racing shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I raced barefoot cross country. I mean, I don't need shoes really. I mean, obviously I'm not going to go out and run road races barefooted because the road's going to eat my feet. But I preferred a shoe that didn't make my foot do anything other than let it protect it.
Mm-hmm.
The least shoe I could get, the better I felt about it. But I'm now running the carbon shoes, but let's don't get into shoes yet.
Liz, your daughter's preparing for, marathoning as the next step of her career. How, and you coach her, so what difference in training compared to what you were doing would you give to her as far as training now?
A massive difference, because I never used altitude. I was a sea level athlete. Altitude works really well with Ailish, and we've learned a lot over the years for the altitude to be tuned into her, and it works really, really well. Nutrition's a lot better. The science and the testing's a lot better. I mean, I never got tested for even IM, like you've got your, physiologist testing. So there's a lot of not only technology, but there's a lot of science, nutrition, everything is back, and there's also good drugs out there as well. So there's a lot of that are making performances far superior to what they used to be. I don't think anybody's training any less or any harder. It's just the recovery is better because of the aided technology that they've got now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the types of fueling, obviously like, Martin is a big one that came out, is coming out these new revolutionary gels and products. That stands out. But nutrition, what you can take for fueling during a marathon now is vastly different. But I think talking about recovery, all of you probably when you were younger probably ran pretty hard most of the time. And I think now there's a much bigger emphasis on how important recovery is as opposed to training. Recovery, it seems like, is just as important as training. And I think there's a bigger emphasis on that now than when we were all younger. Would any of you agree on that?
The recovery, there may be more emphasis, but I think, and Paula talked about her recovery, and I discovered was very important for me. I'll throw out one of the things I think is vastly changed is training groups. I think everybody here basically ran on their own. I mean, we did most of our training solo, and at least in the US, and I guess Kenya and Ethiopia too, everybody trains in a pack. And it makes it a little easier if you've got somebody. Although I did occasionally run with people, usually I didn't like to run with people because they'd try to run too fast because they thought I needed them to run fast for me. But training groups, and it also means that there's somebody there watching, making sure you're doing things you're supposed to do. Usually you have somebody there giving you fluids in a long run. I never got fluids. I tried to figure out where the gas stations were so I could get some water, but typically I drink maybe two piece, stop twice for water in a 20-mile run. So those kinds of things I think are improving the ability to train.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, I think for me certainly, learning to do my recovery runs slower and my runs the night before a workout was something that my husband, I guess, taught me maybe before we even got married. And that was a big turning point in my career and certainly helped me to get more out of myself in races, just kind of understanding that how I'd grown up as a kid was basically every training session was just hard. I didn't even understand tempo runs. It was just flat out. So learning to put that recovery in was key in getting more from myself. And I think Benji said, one of the biggest changes now is that training in the group and just the attention to small detail, which maybe was a one-off or a coincidence in the top runners for a long time. And now it's like everybody's got access to that. Everybody's got access to the best nutrition support, the training groups. They understand there's a lot more data that goes into how much you need to sleep and recover, and tracking your sleep. And we never had any of that. It was just kind of just go to bed and just try and learn that yourself. And
technology now, most sport watches have the feature where you can look at it and it tells you how well you've recovered from your last run and when you're ready to run hard again. You know,
of course, it lies a lot.
You know, what your resting heart rate is. You know, you look at that in the morning, and if you know if your resting heart rate's 10 beats higher than normal, you're probably coming down with something, or you need to, you know, take it easy. I think that's a huge factor in that aspect of technology where it monitors recovery for us. And none of us had that when we were younger, obviously. Huge factor.
Well,
there.
I did do the pulse tracking because I remember I did that since I was 12 or 13. And my coach used to say, before you get out of bed, I want you to just count your pulse for 30 seconds and double it and tell me what it is. And if it's up more than 5-6 beats, then we change the training for the day. So that was something that was in, but it's just much easier to do now and much more accurate.
Absolutely. So let's talk about footwear. Paul, I think when you ran your world record, you were running in some like the Air Streak Spectrum, something like that.
Yeah, so I think it was the Streak Spectrum, which we then exactly, but the red one, and then we kind of tweaked that a little to build into the Zoom Marathon.
So
in around about 2004.
This shoe is basically it's Cushlon or Phylon, which is a blown foam midsole, nothing spectacular, no plates, no plastic. Was a really great racing flat, very flexible at the time. And then 2016 comes around and we get the first iteration of the Vaporfly. It's the game changer. At first, before Nike released the shoe, guys are calling around campus, they were saying 3%. But then when it came released, it became the 4%. So let's look at that number. Paula, your PR 2:15:25. You take 4% off that, and it becomes exactly 2 hours and 10 minutes. I mean, that's not that much of an outlier compared to, you know, the gal just ran 2:11:53. I mean, do you think that is the big factor here? Do you think footwear is the main thing that's changing the game?
I think it's a factor. I think it's not the main thing. I think, as Liz said, there are lots of other factors at play. I think a lot got made when the shoes first came out, this 4%, it's 4% quicker. And then all of the research showed, no, it's not, it's 4% more efficient. And I guess the biggest thing about it is the unfairness of it. So one runner might respond a lot better than another runner, which hadn't really happened before with running shoes. I mean, everybody had the shoe that they preferred, but there wasn't that much difference there. And of course, it's impossible to know as well. If I could say how many times somebody said, well, what do you think you could run in the shoes? I have no idea. I like running in them now. I definitely think that they help me to not get hurt and to enjoy my running more now, particularly if I have to run on the road instead of the trails where I'd be happier running. So I see that advantage of it. And I think that the full impact of them on racing times has taken longer to unfold, because, as I say, I think it is also that build-up of faster, more efficient training, better recovery, all of that playing into it. Plus, when you start to see some people running quick, of course, there's that, well, if that many people can run faster, then we must all be able to run faster. So it becomes into a snowball effect as well. If I'm being honest, I think there are some points when they've been used as a little bit of a smokescreen as well, and the performance has absolutely nothing to do with the shoes. But that's been something that's been hung up there as this is why this athlete has suddenly run a lot quicker. And so that we have to be careful for that reason as well. But I do think that the biggest thing is the advantage that every everyday runner sees, and it's changed the complexion of marathon running. And that's why I said for a long time I thought, well, I'd love to see what I could run in the shoes. And now I'm coming around to the fact that I'm actually really glad that I had my time when I did, because I think if we were all running in the shoes now, the advantages that I had as a runner that put me ahead of the other runners running with me at the time would not be advantages today, because I think primarily they were the psychological and physiological ability to hold it together when everything was hurting, and just to stay in the zone and concentrating. And I don't think that's as hard to do now, just because I do think that those little weaknesses in your body that really come to the fore once you get past 30K don't really come to the fore so quickly with the newer technology, and your body is protected a little bit more with that.
Liz, 226.52, 4% off that knocks you down to 221 flat. Still going to be a very competitive time in any major marathon. Your daughter's sponsored by ASICS now. They have some very comparable product to what the original Nike products. How much of a factor do you think shoes are in the game now?
I think shoes are a major factor. I mean, Paul has covered everything that I think everybody sitting here is probably going to say. You know, you do get an advantage. But, you know, when it first came out, you know, I was kind of like dragging my heels about it, because it was kind of unfair, because Nike were well ahead of the game, and there was other athletes that, you know, weren't running in carbon and all that stuff. But we're at this, you know, stage now where most brands have all got carbon, so it's a level playing field. But records to be broken the way they have, and to actually say to compare them to Paula's world records, you just can't do it. You know, it's impossible to compare it, because it's kind of like what Paula touched on. You know, if she wore the shoes, would she run 2:09, 2:10, 2:11? Would she run 2:13? We do not know, because it is a very individual as to how you react to the shoes, the type of runner that you are, the advantages that you get. So, you know, there's a lot of things that come into play. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, if I had the shoes on, I would run X, Y, and Z. As far as my times were concerned, like, I was in a day where, you know, we didn't have pacemakers. You know, your prize money was in winning, so you didn't take a gamble. You know, you sat in and you raced. You didn't go for the fast times. So, you know, although I ran, you know, to 26, I was far capable of running a lot faster than that in my day, but I never got the opportunity, or put myself in the opportunity, because, you know, we just didn't race like that. You know, so getting pacers in is a massive difference in races now, you know, because you're not needing to do the work yourself. You're just sitting in, and you know that these guys are going to run it, you know, 2:13, 2:15, 2:18. They have different paces for each different group now, which they never had when I was running. So, you know, that makes a massive difference, as well as the shoes. So, you know, all in all, we're just in an era that's moved forward. And, you know, we obviously accept that era. But for me, I think although the technology's moved on, we're still dragging our heels behind with anti-doping. You know, we're getting lots of athletes out there not getting tested properly, but we're all complaining about shoes. So for me, if you're going to complain about shoes, you should actually be complaining about the anti-doping system worldwide, because there's lots of athletes that are winning races and not getting tested the way I know certain athletes are getting tested.
It's accessible in the US, but don't you all feel that WADA should have a website where you can see how often people are tested, especially, obviously no idiot is going to fail a drug test on a race day. There's too many ways around it.
If they're not stupid, they're not going to fail.
Yeah, out of competition testing is a huge factor here, and obviously they're starting to do a lot more of that in Kenya. Obviously, it's becoming a factor there, but there's a lot of, especially when COVID happened, drug testing was non-existent because of COVID. Because obviously, not many people were racing. There was the factor that people didn't want to get exposed. while that era was happening. So that even changed the game during that era of COVID, that testing wasn't as dominant as it is now. But do you feel like that's the biggest factor, is that people aren't getting tested out of competition and they know how to get around it on race day?
I just think that the sport's a bit biased because, like, obviously myself and Paula come from the UK, and our athletes are tested all the time. And, you know, we don't complain about it. You know, my daughter's probably one of the most tested athletes that I've known. You know, she gets tested at least once, twice a month. No matter where she is, she's getting tested. And then, you know, you go to races and she gets tested there as well. And, you know, it shouldn't be like Britain or America or whatever. Like, you know, I think like all the countries should be together and there's one WADA, whatever you want to call it. And it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what excuse you do, but everybody follows the same procedures. Like I've seen UK athletes being in a camp where there's Kenyans, Ethiopians, Germans, and they come for one UK athlete. You know, it's like, well, why one when you know that, you know, there's Kenyan athletes there, there's Ethiopian athletes there. Why are you coming all that way for one athlete? And I just think that is really biased. And I think that until we actually get a strong voice and people stand and say, like, you know, this isn't right, we need to do something far more than what we're doing just now. You know, not just accepting that it's religion or we can't afford it, or, you know, we haven't got the people to come over and do it. It's just nonsense. In this day and age, if we've got all the technology and all the support and all the money that the companies have got, it is nonsense that people are still not following proper anti-doping procedures and getting tested on a regular basis.
I mean, in fairness, it is something that the major marathons are trying to put in, is that when they immediately they sign up the fields, that those fields are then communicated to the AIU and they do go and test them. But as Liz said, it isn't put into play enough. And in a lot of places, and particularly the high altitude camps where athletes do go, as Liz said, the Europeans will be tested unannounced there. That's never unannounced. If you're going into Ethiopia and you're testing Ethiopians, they know you're coming.
Yeah, you can't.
So that has to be changed.
You can't fly into Ethiopia as a tester and actually expect to find the athletes. They just disappear into the bush.
Yeah. So Kenya gets the bad press, but it's no by no means just concentrated on Kenya. And there are other countries as well, like Morocco and places like that, where the testers can't get in without it being announced. Yeah. And that can't happen because they're already, if we're honest, the testing isn't up to the right standard anyway. There must be a lot of stuff that's being abused that isn't showing up in the tests. Well, so they're already playing catch up, and it's got to be announced.
We started having conversations about, you know, just over 2 hours, and we're thinking, okay, when I talked to a friend, and he sent me an article about a new drug the cyclists are taking, that if you take it at noon, by midnight you're clean. And so testing,
there could be an outlier out there. Obviously, when Marianne Jones got popped, they didn't know what she was on until they came forward and said, here's what she's on, develop a test for it. You know, they call it the clear. It's a human growth hormone. You know, there could be something out there that, you know, we're not even aware of. This drug
that he sent me, I had never heard of it before, and I can't remember the name of it.
It's okay to be one step ahead, but, you know, when you're like 3, 4, 5 steps behind what the new things are out there, you know, there's no excuse for it at all. And, you know, I think that, you know, you're getting, like, for instance, I'm a coach, and I know to get my athletes peaking, they need to run certain races at a certain time to get progression. And you're just getting athletes coming out of nowhere, never raced for 2-3 years, and then all of a sudden they run, like, you know, amazingly quick times. And you're like, where have they been for 2 years? Like, you have to race to get into peak shape. You can't do it just in training. As a coach, as an athlete, you know that. You know, but then it's just like, oh, it's the shoes. Okay, fair dues. Whatever.
Yeah, but, you know, are becoming an excuse.
Rod and some of you other guys who were racing in the early 80s, did you ever get tested out of competition outside of a race?
Never got tested, period.
Random testing?
Only at the Olympics. There was random testing, and Commonwealth Games weren't were quite good.
Nothing, no testing after road races at the time. Nothing going on. Yeah.
They knew I drank beer and that was it. They were happy.
I didn't even know that there was any drug possibilities when I was competing. I mean, obviously there were people doing it, but I didn't know it. I was oblivious. And I
Yeah.
never was tested. My career ended before testing really became common.
Yeah. And you hadn't heard rumors that blood doping and things of
Well,
that nature.
blood doping,
Right there.
we did hear rumors. And
Yes.
a physiologist who was also a good marathoner, Russ Pate, he was at the University of Columbia in South Carolina. No, actually, he was in Columbia in South Carolina. I think it's University of South Carolina. Anyway, he initially talked about, because we heard about this, and we thought, okay, that's just nuts. That can't be helping like that. No, that's nuts. And so he was going to do a study to, actually figure this out. So Billy and I and a couple other guys said, okay, sure, we can let you do this. We'll see, just for the study. And the human factors people said, no, that's too dangerous. You can't do that. And then later on, you find out it is dangerous, and it is a bad thing to do.
Right. Yeah. Talking about the shoes again, having worn several different versions of the Nike products, I think the foam itself in the shoe, what they call Zoom X foam, I think is as big, if not a bigger factor than the actual carbon fiber plates that they're using, as far as like recovery on a day-to-day basis and how your legs don't feel thrashed after a long run or a race. Any of you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the foam is not just the recovery and the cushioning, it's the fact that you still get the energy return. So it's the combination, if you like, of the two together. I mean, when we were tweaking with the Zoom Marathoner, we were actually making the midsole harder, because at that point, if you went with a softer midsole, you didn't get the energy return. So we were trying to go like as hard as my legs could tolerate, and so that you could get a better energy return from it. But then once you combine, once you combine the foam with the plate, and then now I guess companies are also trying to put more than one plate in there, and that is why they're also behind the game with just keeping the regulations. As Liz said before, it's got to be fair. So you have to, but I'm not sure World Athletics really knew what all the options were in order to be able to put rules in place that were fair. And so they're kind of similar to anti-doping. They're playing catch up as well, trying to kind of put a lid on it all. And at the same time, as Liz said, allow the benefits, because I think the benefits are there for every runner. And it's a different era. And I think when you look at it as a different era, what you've just got to make sure is that stays fair, that there isn't one brand that's got two plates and the others have only got one, and then they all play catch up, and then it's back level for a little bit, and then someone else jumps ahead. It's kind of like, let's control it as much as possible. But I do think it's the combination of the plate plus the foam.
Rod, 208.59 knocks you down to 203.50 if you take 4% off of that.
I'll take it.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, Tabb, and that's just it's just incredible, because my era was so back with Ron really, and Benji, and just to listen to you, Paula, and Liz, what you experienced in your time, and it's just just where it's all going. And but for me, that's I know how hard I trained, I know how well we trained, how balanced we were in our training, and that was the best we could do in our time. And so to hear and to understand how athletes are training now, and as a Benji, I had a job. Through 72. In fact, it was 73, 74 that I finally realized, that if I was going to spend time in Europe, I really couldn't have a job. I wasn't allowed holidays and time off and sick pay. I'd run out of everything. And so that's why, we realized we had to come and live in Europe. And in those days, you had to apply to the IAA, into the IAAF in those days for a tourist visa, because under the amateur rules you were not allowed to be away from your home country for 30 days. And it was just we spent 30% of our time trying to dodge the IAAF amateur rules. Because amateur was just that cloud over us, and we were restricted to a point. Even when we came back, we were searched by the customs, because the amateur athletic people said, "Look out! They'll be bringing back money. They'll be bringing out wads of money." So it was just an odd time, but that's how we lived. That's how we did it.
Yeah. And one thing that, as you were talking, the marathoners that came before us had it even worse in that the IAAF did not allow you to have fluids until after 10 miles.
Yes.
And it was only every 5 miles.
Yes.
So the first 10 miles you had to be on, no fluid.
Yeah. Yes.
When did that change, Benji? Do you know?
It changed in the late 70s. We started having it in races, but we weren't supposed to. And I actually don't remember getting fluids in my first few marathons. I just ran them dry.
Yeah.
And then when I finally did get fluids, it was water. And I had water throughout my career.
And probably not anybody carrying their own fluids during a race back.
Well,
back
yeah, but if you're carrying it, you got a bottle in your hand.
Sure.
And that's you don't want to do that.
Right.
And in fact, I think the first time I got fluids that I could actually grab was Olympic trials in '80. I mean, in a bottle. You have cups, and I learned how to drink out of a cup. Squeeze it and fold it, and then you'd hate the ones that had plastic cups because you couldn't do anything with those at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go to one last question before we wrap up. If you could pick one word to describe yourself, how you would want to be remembered, and you can only pick one word to describe that, what word do you think you would pick for yourself? Ron, we'll start with you.
Wild.
Wild.
Good boy. You were.
It's a good one. Liz, how about you?
Scottish,
Scottish.
not British.
Good one.
English, Scottish.
Rod, what do you think?
It'd be Kiwi.
Okay. Well, look,
God, it's hard.
English.
It's a long time. No, I'm not going to say English. I live in Europe. I want a European passport. I don't want the English one. It gets you nowhere. That's what English found out. Genuine.
Genuine. Okay. Benji, what do you think?
Persistent.
Resistant.
Persistent.
Good one.
Keep
right.
pushing.
Good
All
boy.
right. Connor,
Okay,
we're gonna
Dave.
give
How do you describe yourself?
Connor, we're going to give you a chance here. Any questions that you want to ask of anybody?
Sure, I have a question for everyone. Out of all the marathons you ran, what was your favorite course?
Paula, we'll start with you.
It's a tough. I love the New York course, but I think it has to be London, because London is the one that inspired me to fall in love with marathon running in the first place when I was down watching my dad. And then I think, as Liz will probably concur, for a British athlete to be leading the London Marathon, I don't think anything can quite compare to that feeling.
Liz, we'll go to you.
Definitely London. Again, it's like the Americans running in New York. It's your home country, and the feeling of running down the mall with all the British flags and Buckingham Palace, and it just is very, very meaningful and emotional. So it brings emotion because it's your home country. So yeah, definitely London. I wouldn't say that. I'd be a bit like Paula. I think the course is more interesting, and I like hills, so the course was really interesting and tough in New York, which I liked, and I liked the crowds. But I think just the home support and what it means to win the London Marathon as a British athlete is it's really emotional.
And Benji, of 139 marathons, what's your favorite course?
The Nike OTC in Eugene.
Wow.
Pretty legendary marathon there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 2-lap course, but you ran under the trees along the river there. And I mean, I don't know, it's just, it was it rolled a little bit, so it wasn't totally flat. And then you get to finish at Hayward Field.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. That was a who's who of marathoning on called the Gathering of Eagles.
Yep.
Yeah. Ron, your favorite marathon?
I'd have to say the granddaddy of them all, be Boston, just because the crowd's there, not because that was my PR performance, but just because the crowds are amazing and the history of it. You know, so many greats have run that, and so I would have to say Boston.
And Rod, your thoughts?
Yeah, New York. Yeah. 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 Something.
Again, New York for me as well, like I said, because the crowd in the city comes alive. But Boston has some special memories. My wife and I both ran the year of the bombing, so we were there for that. And then in 2015 is actually where we got engaged. She ran that day and I didn't. She ran a PR and it was wet and windy and she looked so cold. I thought about proposing at the finish line, but I thought, no, better wait for her to get warm. And did it that night at dinner. Yeah, and there were some other people running that I coached there, so we all gathered that night at dinner, and it worked out much better for everybody, I think. And she actually said yes, so that was a plus. So it worked out well. Yeah, Connor, anything else you'd like to ask?
Nope. Thank you for letting me listen.
All right. Anybody else have anything they want to touch on before we wrap? All right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you. Thank you. It's been fun to enjoy and to listen to the stories. So thanks to everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Nice
everybody
to
coming
connect.
on. We're gonna do one of these in the not too distant future where we're probably gonna talk about our experience with cross country. Maybe after the NCAA championships wrap up here in a couple weeks, and we'll get some people together and we'll talk all about cross country and our memories and experiences running cross country. So thank you again, everybody, for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I will
Bye, everyone.
post it and send everybody an email to the link if you want to share it later.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Bye, y'all.
Cheers.